complement, okay, we are able to identify if the number is a negative or a positive by checking the most significant bit. If the most significant bit is 1, it means that this is a negative number. But the question is, kung negative siya, how will we know kung pilay actual weight? Using the two's complement, okay, you simply invert all the bits. Okay? Ang 1 mahimong 0, ang 0 mahimong 1, and then you add a value of 1. So you have this one. And what is this value? What is this binary value, guys? What does this binary value represent again? In 1, remembers the binary to decimal conversion, okay, using positional weight. Hello? Guys? Okay, so sa equivalent ani niya?
-5, sir.
Okay, so that is -5. Okay? So, you want to know more about Proof's complement, okay? Just open your calculator and go to programmer. Let's say, for example, if you have here 5, okay? So 5 is written as 0100. However, if you want it to be negative, this is how it is stored in your computer. So, since kani, assuming you are using a very large storage, keyword mo na perting taasa. But if you try to convert this into a byte storage, as you can see, that is how -5 is stored in your computer. Okay? So, mao ni gamit aning sa programmer option sa inyong calculator. Okay? So, later, you might be using a lot of this. Okay? This feature of your calculator. Okay? So, very useful in number conversion, but you are only limited into using hex, decimal, octal, and binary. Okay, with your knowledge gained before about number conversion using positional weight and sa ganito, repeated division, okay, you can now convert any decimal number into its equivalent base number. Okay? So, mo na siya guys, si negative numbers inside your computers. Okay? So, napunta gitawag nga real numbers. Okay? Unsa man ang real numbers? Okay, by the way, what are the so-called real numbers? So, sorry for that. Okay. So, again, guys, what are the so-called real numbers? Do you still remember? Positive whole numbers. Okay. What else? What are the so-called real numbers? So, in the programming terminology, when you talk about whole numbers, guys, we refer to them as integers. Okay. However, if let's say, for example, you have this number with decimal part or fractional part, okay, we call that here as real numbers. Okay, so these are numbers that has fractional part or decimal part, and the computer actually has another way of storing those information inside your computer. Okay? So again, they are still stored in binary form, but they make use of the so-called IEEE 754 standard, okay, which is used for storing floating point notation. Okay, so if it basically looks like this, okay, just to give you an overview. Okay, so in the floating point standard, naatay for 32 bits o naapod tay for 64 bit. Okay, so let's say when talking about 64-bit, okay, one bit, again, the most significant bit, is utilized for the sign bit. Okay? The next 8 bits, okay, are used as your exponent. Okay? So this is the sign bit. And the rest of the bits, the remaining bits, are for the mantisa. Okay? Are you familiar with these guys? Kanina terminologies? Sign,
Algebra,
exponent,
sir.
and mantisa. Okay. So, given, let's say, na kay binary number, okay? So, let's say 1.000010. Okay? So, your value is actually expressed in a so-called scientific notation. Okay? So, let's say times 2 raised to the power of 5 baron. Okay? So, what is stored inside your computer is kani. Okay? So, kani nga binary part is stored here in the matrisa. Okay? And this value here is the value, okay, nga giplasan of 127, okay, is stored here under sa exponent. Okay? And you have here again the sign bit 1 if it is negative and 0 if it is a positive number. Okay? So the computer makes use of this format in storing your floating point number. So gitawag na siyang floating point number because ang position sa imuhang decimal point is changing depending sa exponent that is stored in the exponent part of your floating point standard. Okay? So we will not discuss in depth niya, okay? Because that will be reserved for higher subjects, okay? But if you're, let's say, really curious about how that works, okay? So you can search it here, guys. IEEE 754, okay? Floating point representation. So there's actually a calculator nga pwede nimong masuwayan para makita sad nimo asa naman to. Para makita ninyo how your decimal points are stored inside your computer. Okay? So, let's say kani, okay? If inside your computer naatay nga nga value, okay? So, check meaning negative. Then, naatay value naka-store dira under sa exponent having this value. And, let's say, kana. Okay? So, kaning ipang check mark guys representing 1. Okay? So, kaning naka-store nga sa computer having these values here is representing 2.4. Okay? So, kung ganahan po ka baliktad, let's say 3.5. Okay? How is that stored inside my computer? Okay? So, hindi nga na siya pag-store inside your computer. Okay? So, you'll see here the numerical value. Okay? The decimal. And here is the binary representation. I want to play again, teacher. So, mo na siya guys. Okay. Ang ato ang um, floating point scheme notation. Okay, for representing real numbers. So again, that will be another topic. Okay, there will be another class dedicated for topics like this. So at least it gives you an overview as to how those informations are really stored in your computer. And of course, making sense of your Microsoft's calculator na programmers. Okay, so hopefully you have learned something new about your Windows calculator. Okay, so magamit ra na ninyo guys. Okay, so these are again some of the other data, okay, that are stored inside your computer. So when you are talking about digital images, we typically make use of the so-called pixel, or otherwise known as picture elements, to represent those images. Okay? So when you talk about pixels, these are further divided into three. Okay? Three colors. And what are these colors again? Okay? Are you familiar with the colors represented?
Primary color, sir.
Okay, and what? So primary color, o sa matong mga primary color ang imong gipasabot, Mr. Den Gabriel.
Kato, katong
Red, blue, yellow.
red. Oh, ano, sir.
Okay. So kana guys, okay, na ini sulti nga RGB, na pinisulti nga red, blue, yellow. Which one of these is considered as the primary colors when you are talking about um, colors shown on the monitor? Okay. So kanang si red, blue, and yellow guys, okay, those are the primary colors that we have learned during our elementary years. Okay, so kaning RGB, these are the colors nga makita ninyo, okay, directly from the monitor. Okay, so those are the light. Kung makabantay mo kanang magtabi gani ka, nakasuway mo ana guys, kanang magtabi mo niya mo pisik imong laway agtod sa imong screen. Okay, unsay mabantayan nimo?
Nay karat, sir.
Na ay karat.
Nya, nay color.
Okay, and what are this karat and color nga inyong nakita? Unsa man tong kolora? Okay, naka-familiar mo unsa na siya nga color? Okay, so red, blue, and green. Okay, the RGB. Okay, so nadyo nakabantayan niya kay grabe kay mo dagstorya ang laway pisik-pisik. Kaya watos monitor kay makabantay mo na katong napiskan nimo maklaro jud nimo dito tarong kung unsa na ang color, okay, that is used to represent a single color in the monitor. So actually when you see a color other than red, green, and blue, those are just combination of red, green, and blue na colors. Kanang itawag na tong red, yellow, and blue, the primary colors that we've learned during the elementary years, those are considered as subtractive color. Okay? Whereas kanang RGB mo na siyang ato ang gitawag na additive color. Additive colors are those colors that we see directly from the light source. Whereas kaning subtractive color are reflected colors. Colors that we see as a reflection of the light. Okay? So, one good example ini guys is, let's say for example, in a television, when it is turned off, no light, unsay color makita ninyo? You can use your mic guys. So So what color do we see if there is no light present shown on the monitor? Anyone? Okay, black. Because simply black is the absence of light. Okay, so managitawag na ang red, yellow, ug blue is subtractive colors because the more you add colors, the more that you lose the color. Okay, di ba? When you combine red, blue, and yellow, what colors is being produced, guys? Okay. So again, when you combine red, blue, and yellow, nga paint, what color do you produce? Color learn cognitive interpretatory painting. Okay. So it's actually muddy color. Okay. So it's a muddy color ang imuhang ma-produce ana niya. So it's not totally black, but like it's like muddy brown. Okay? Very dark muddy brown. That's why po sa kanang printer ninyo guys, unsa may mga color cartridges in your printer. Okay, do you recognize the colors in your printers? Diba?
Black,
Black,
yellow,
yellow.
Cyan,
um,
magenta,
red.
yellow, black.
So that's actually cyan and magenta. Okay? So nganong nga pa may black ang ako ang printer cartridge? Because when you use manggod cyan, magenta, and yellow color, it is a waste of ink. Combining three colors just to create a single color and it's not even totally black. Okay? So mo ng engineers added the black color para na kay totally black na color na pwede mo gamit. Okay? So with pixels, okay, those are the colors that you see directly from the monitor. Okay? Lahi pud ang iyang behavior when you are combining colors. When you combine colors, red and blue, di ba, you produce purple. Mao na to ang naagyan sa unang pag-elementary. But when you combine colors here, guys, okay, so another learning, okay, ang all-time favorite ninyong application siguro sa una, paint. Okay? So when you combine colors, kaling si RGB, these are what we call as the primary colors in your digital screen. As you can see here, red and blue. Okay? So this so-called red component is represented by 8 bits. So that means you can have a value you can have a value from 0 to 255. So let's say I'll put that 255. That means mo na ang highest intensity sa color sa red na you can produce. Okay? If you combine that with the blue color, okay, you produce the magenta color. Okay? So red and blue creates magenta. Now what about blue and green? Okay? So when you combine blue and green, okay, you produce cyan. And if you combine red and green, you produce yellow. Okay? Did you see now the relationship, guys? Sa colors? Okay? So, na kay red, blue, and green. Here you produce the yellow, and here you produce the cyan, and here you produce the magenta. And what else have we noticed? Kung kani, ibutang nimo 000, that means no light, you produce the black color. However, if you put there 255, kanan, okay, what color is produced? You produce white. Okay, so white is the combination of all three colors RGB. Okay, so that represents that when your red, green, and blue light is reach its full intensity, you produce the white color. Okay, now what will happen if let's say naara sa 50 ang value ni red? Okay, as you can see, darker ang pagka-red niya, guys. Now, what if that is the same also for red, green, and blue? Okay, kabantay ba mo sa change in color? Maybe not. I'll probably try to increase this to, let's say, 150. Okay, so if they all have the same color, kung sa'yo nabantayan niyo, guys, what is the color being produced? If the
Gray, sir.
value of the red, green, and blue are the same, you produce the shades of gray. Okay? So, mo din na ang pag-generate sa gray na color. You simply make sure that the red, green, and blue are of the same intensity. Okay? So, be it kung na highest ang intensity, white, or the lowest intensity, going black. Okay? So, mo na siya, guys. Okay? And mo ni siya ang tuluka composition of what a pixel is. It contains information for the red, blue, and the green to generate the so-called picture color. Okay, so again, another important application in your Windows environment. Okay, so kanang mga numero dira, later you will be able to explore how to do graphics programmatically. Okay, so or how to create your own paint program. Okay, so manang dapat makatawag punta about kana, colors, how colors are produced inside your computer. Okay, so napatay gitawag na digital sounds. Okay, so which is broken into small pieces known as samples. So we know that sound is an analog signal. Okay, so when you say analog signal, it is continuous. Okay? So, ang sound nimo will be represented by something like this. Okay? Now, when your computer store that information, there is no way that it could accurately reproduce these so-called sound waves. Okay? So, what the computer do is it actually stores this sound wave, okay, in digital format by taking samples, okay, of your analog data. Okay, so king ana ra na sa computer, guys, kuha siyang sample at regular intervals. Okay, so those are the so-called digital data. So the higher the number of samples, the better is the quality of the sound being produced. Okay? So mo nang sa mga karaang computer sa una, usa na siya sa specs nga tan-awon aning mga musician or digital musicians when choosing a so-called sound card. Tan-aw nila pilay bitrate, okay, sa imong sound card. Okay, the higher it is, the better. Okay, so karong panahon na murag wala naman kayo paki ang mga tao sa kanang sa sound card. Kay ngano man, basically murag pare-pareha ra man og quality tanan. Okay, di na nimo mabantayan ang kaning gitawag nato nga bitrate. Okay, it's becoming a standard na. Okay, so mo na siya, guys. And of course, how do program works inside your computer? So again, I think sa ato ang nabasahan diri, we know that the computer is not smart. Okay? The computer becomes smart only with the program that is installed to it. So in short, mo bright ang computer depende sa programmer. Okay? So what are the typical operations of a computer? So basically, okay, the computer fetches the program from the memory. Okay, so mo ang fetch operation, and then the CPU is in charge of performing the decoding, okay, of this so-called program. So, ang program na to is written in unsa nga language, guys? Ang nato kung mahinumdum ba sa gibasa. So, nakita nato inside there is 1010. Unsa man na siya nga programming language? Is it a high-level programming language? Middle level programming language? Is it an assembly code? Or is it a machine language? Okay, so according to Mr. Canonigo, this is a machine language. A language that machines fully understand. Okay? A simple and on and off na operation. Okay? So, with the CPU decoding this so-called instruction, it then execute those instructions. And basically, it could return some of those data back to the memory or give it to the so-called IOs. Okay? So, mo na siya guys ang operation sa ato ang CPU. Okay? So, why fetch it from the RAM? Why not from the ROM? So, again, going back sa itong previous na topic that when you open an application, okay, the application is typically stored in the ROM. But if you open an application, those codes are transferred to the RAM. Okay? So any running program is actually run directly from the RAM, dili from the ROM. Okay? Kaya ang ROM storage na siya. Okay? And when you are trying to run an application, your CPU is working directly with the RAM. Okay? Mao may mas paspas. Okay? So as what you can see here guys, ang evolution sa machine language. Okay? Or sa atong gitawag na computer language. Starting with the machine language wherein again it works on the level of the machine. Let's say for example, during the time sa early computer, dili ko na siya on and off. It's basically open and close operation. Okay? And then it evolved into the so-called symbolic language or what we commonly known as the assembly language using symbols, okay, to represent your machine language. Kaya nga mo man tamo gamit ang machine language kanang symbolic language man. Kay ang kapoy man kay memorize anang 1001 and it really doesn't make sense at the first glance. So that's why they created the so-called assembly language. Okay? So with this assembly language, again, as stated, di ba, ay gitawag na itong assembler which converts the assembly language code into machine language. So, kailangan gihapon converted into machine language para masabtan sa imong CPU. Okay? So, at least kung magtanaw ka sa program, di ba, instead kung magtanaw kag 100010, ang makita na nimo is something like this. Okay? Nga naay a bit of word that you could understand like kanang add, kanang move. Okay? Move nga YE. Okay? So, gituyo ra na as programmer guys because the lesser the word, the easier is it for them to create the program. Okay? So, of course, ang problema manggod sa kaning machine o sa imuhang assembly language is it is very specific to a particular machine. If you try to develop a program for another machine, you need to learn its assembly language. Okay? So, kaning assembly language, it might not be true for all. Maglailahi ni siya on every platform. Okay? So, that's why kung programmer ka that was born during the 70s, it was really hard. Okay, nga naman, if you want to learn how to program, you need to be more specific about the machine that you will be using and you get to know about that machine's capability. Dili pareha karon kung mag-program ka, if you're using a PC, a laptop, or a mobile phone, your program will run on any platform. Okay? So it removes the complexity of learning the machine. Okay? So, mao na-develop ang kanina gitawag nato nga high-level language. So, this high-level language are more like an English language ang gigamit, which is human readable. Okay? So, one major advantage yun niya is kanang gitawag nato nga machine independence. So, you really not know the hardware in detail. Okay? So, it will be having this so-called mga keywords, syntax that you need to know, which is, of course, particular to a type of language that you will be using. Okay, let's say for instance, kana si Fortran, COBOL, Pascal, Basic, C, C++, Java, C Sharp, they all have their own syntax for you to follow. Okay? So of course, this is not as fast as compared to the machine language or assembly language. But the development for the software is much more easier. Okay? So the ugon radira during software development. Okay? So here is an example of a program that is written in C. Okay? So mao na ang ato ang katunon later. Okay? So when you run your program, okay, you would be having this so-called source code. Okay? So if you've remembered katong sa election fiasco nga nahitabo sa una, sige sila pangita sa source code. Sa source code, what is that source code that they were asking about? Okay? So kisay nakahinumdum ato guys katong election last year naggubot kaayo. Kay supposed to be laging nakaayo ang usa ka candidate niya. After some updates gibuhat ni kalit lang og saka ang iyahang number of votes. Okay? Do you remember that? Okay? So probably it didn't concern you kay di pa man mo botante sa una, no? Pero hopefully karon you have already registered and you can exercise your voting right. And again, vote wisely. Okay? So again, this so-called source code can be edited with any text editor program. You can actually make use of a simple notepad. Okay? But for beginners, it would be hard using the notepad and compiling the code via the command line. Okay? So there is this so-called compiler that converts your source code into machine language or kanang gitawag nato nga object file. Okay? So there will be another program that converts or rather merges this object file and a library provided by the compiler, okay, together with the compiler to combine katong mga additional codes that you are using to create your executable program. Okay? So that executable program is a combination of your source code and the code that is common to that programming language. Okay? And that program, once run, kita na nimo sa screen kung sa gibuhat nimo. Okay? So for the text editor that we will be using, we'll just rely on dev C++ katong pang Embarcadero. Okay? So actually, there's a lot of compilers for C. Okay? So na yung Orlan, na yung Sigwin, Penguin, but I think let's just use katong sa TDM provided by Embarcadero. Okay? So murag I think there's an update to that compiler, but ang panload with Embarcadero is katong 9.2, which is actually okay ra. Okay? So, muna siya guys, okay? Now, some things that we will be learning in the future, okay? So we will be knowing more about what these so-called keywords or reserved words are, what are the common operators na ginagamit, kinsa man tong makaagi na dire og coding during senior high. So you are already familiar with this one. Okay, the syntax. Essentially, for those who have undergone C Sharp or Java, pare-pareha rin siya guys. Okay, ang operators di pang gamit. Sa syntax, in a way, slightly na difference. Okay, o unsa man gitawag nato nga statements, which basically um, is like an instruction, okay, for your source code. Okay, so a single instruction of your source code. Now, when you are creating your program, okay, naatay gitawag na compiled program o interpreted program. Okay? What is the difference between a compiled program and an interpreted program? Okay, so again, just to give you an overview, okay, this so-called um, compiled program that you will be creating are those programs that will be translated into a machine program, and you need to finish your entire code for it to be compiled. The good thing about compiled program is that before you run the program, you will be able to identify if there is a problem with your code. Okay, because your program will not compile if there is a problem with probably the syntax baron or one of the statements. Okay, so in this event, compiled programs are usually more faster compared to interpreters. Kaya i-compile nimo, i-simplify mo gud niya ang imong program. Okay? Trying to remove all those unnecessary part of the code. Ang interpreter, okay, is basically a program that translates, okay, your code and execute it para sa imong CPU. Okay? So, runtime ni siya mahitabo. So, that means your code is executed one line at a time. And the computer will not be able to know if there is a problem with the entire code until such time that it reaches that line of code na may problema. Okay? Okay, ganyan lang. So, when you say compiled program, does anyone here have an example? What is an example of those programs that are compiled? Okay, guys, anyone? Example of a compiled program? Katong mga nakagi nag-coding before? Hello? Hello, hello? You still here, guys? Ayo. Nangaon na sila. Why nangagda? Okay. Sige daw. Since wala may mo volunteer og answer, let me find a volunteer. Okay? So, sige, nangutan na ta. Kaya may mo volunteer. Oh, wait. Okay. Sige. Let's try to call for someone who might give us an idea about what is an example of a compiled program. Okay. Pog, si Miss Toto is out no for vaccination. Wa may mo volunteer so ako'y mo pili og kinsay volunteer. Okay. So first award, kanyo ni go. Kindly turn on your camera please and answer the question. Paspasan ng Google. Kasi gamit ni Google. Oh, Canonigo, open your camera. Sige, can you give us an example of a compiled program? Microsoft Word. Is Microsoft Word even a programming language? Oh, programming language. Okay, so C++. Okay, that's one. Okay, thank you for that. You can now turn off your camera. Init up taglain. Okay. So muna nindot sa oral recitation, no? Walay pili ba? Walay bias. Okay. Villa Victoria, turn on your camera and give us one more example of a compiled programming language. So natay C++. Use
Football,
that.
sir.
Unsa to? Unsa? COBOL.
Football.
Okay, so nasa example ganina, di ba? So that is one of the so-called compiled programs. Now, how about interpreters? Okay? Unsa example ka sa interpreter? Interpreted language. So, ang na to kung kinsay mga may mo Google diri, tanawa daw. Okay? So,
Python, sir.
Java is
Python.
uh, Python, unsa pa?
PHP, sir.
Kana, PHP. Okay? Usually, kani mga interpreted language, mga web-based ni siya, like JavaScript. Okay? Ang Java, though interpreted siya nga language, but it needs to be compiled paghihapon. Okay? So, kaning pag-interpret sa language sa Java, it's more of because kaning gitawag nato nga Java Virtual Machine or JVM that converts your native code in Java to work with any operating system platform. Okay, so that is why it is possible for it to run on any platform, be it on Windows or Linux. Unlike when you say kani compiled programs like C, if you compile it for Windows, sa Windows na siya kudagan for Linux. Okay? So, mo na si interpreter. So, si interpreter is a bit slower compared sa so-called compiled programs. Okay, so mo na siya guys, ang ato ang first first chapter sa ato ang discussion. Okay? Now, let us proceed with the second part of our discussion, which is all about algorithm, pseudocodes, and flowchart. Okay? So before we discuss about coding, okay, programming, let us first talk about these so-called algorithms, pseudocodes, and flowchart. Okay? So this could actually help us on how to create a more efficient code. Okay? So, introduction, we have already seen the steps that are used to build a program. So, sa to, we need to have the source code, okay, then the compiler, then the linker, then you generate your output. In some programming language, you only have the source code, the compiler, and then finally the output. Okay? So, to create a good structured program, okay, we need to learn about mga development techniques for our program to be more efficient, error-free, and easily maintainable. Okay? Now, unsa man gitawag nato nga techniques. Okay, now here is one of those techniques used for software development. Okay, so this is called the waterfall model. Okay, so one of those models utilized by software engineers when developing a program. So there's actually a lot more of this software engineering techniques or software development techniques, but this is one of the most common one. Okay, so we all start with the system requirements. So now system requirements, you identify what is needed by your program. Okay, and then analysis. Okay, analysis of what? Analysis of how you might be able to solve the problem associated with those requirements. And then you design, or you start the design. Okay, so you can design it using the so-called flowcharts, or kanang gitawag nato nga unified modeling language. Okay, so again, there's a lot of tool for that. Okay, so those design simply acts like a guide for you to implement your code. Okay, so usually ang design, it is not specific to a single language. Okay, it's like a generic solution that could be implemented using any language. Okay, so the coding part, wala na ang more specific part. Okay, you choose your programming language, then you start coding based on your design. So of course, after the coding part, you have the system test. Okay? So mo nang kung anhimog mga software industry, naatay gitawag nga programmer, lahi pud ang tester. Okay? So tester probably is one of the important, okay, parts sa software development, because they are the one that tries to maintain the quality of the code, kung ready na ba siya for deployment or delay. Okay? And then you have there the maintenance. If ever gani naapay problem nga nakalusot sa system test, then it goes back. Okay, as you can see, balik anong taas. Check sa system test na code, anong nakalusot pa ni, kung sa mandoy, or they try to recreate those scenarios that causes the problem, then brings it back to the coder. Yan, if ang coder nanikitan mao di ay nagani nga problema kay wala day makita sa design. So balik na pud sa design. So from design, they again analyze the problem as to how it happened and why it happened. And then they need probably to reevaluate the system requirements. Okay? So pwede sila mag-add og more requirements para nila tungkol ang katong problema. And that, guys, is basically the simple water model technique for software development. Okay? So moving forward, anhita diri dapita sa program planning. Okay? So as stated, to write a correct program, the programmer must write each and every instruction in a correct sequence. Okay? So this will be to ensure that the instructions are appropriate for the program and in correct sequence. And for that, we need to know about the so-called algorithms. Okay? So, unsa maning algorithm? So, as stated there is simply some programming logic that is basically a step-by-step description of how to arrive at a solution of a given program. So, sa lain pang pagkasulti, it's more like a recipe book. Okay? So, if you're into baking, okay, so na kay recipe book, and of course, the steps for what to do first and what to do next. Okay? So, as you can see there, an algorithm has the following characteristic. Each and every instruction should be precise and unambiguous. Okay? So, klaro ang imuhang instruction. Okay? So, every execution of all instructions should be producing the desired result. Okay? So, as what I told you, ang computer nato is bugo. Okay? You cannot just say sa instruction imo nga computer, palit og suka. Okay? So, you must teach the computer a step-by-step sequence of how to buy suka in your sari-sari store. Okay? So, mo na ato ang katulog karon. Okay? Okay, sometimes when we talk about computer, ang ato ang nahuna is that with one command, it will do everything. Okay? But you as a programmer are the one responsible for breaking down that single command into specific commands, okay, that the computer will understand and perform. So one good example there, guys, of an algorithm is on logging to your school's email account. Okay, that of course is if you assume that you remember your password. Okay, so the algorithm will go like this. You go to the portal.ctu.edu.ph, you enter your ID and password, then you click sign in. Okay? So muna siyang atong algorithm for signing on to your school account. Now, let's say for instance, if nalimot mo sa inyong password, okay? How do you log on to your portal ctu.edu.ph? Kita ta. Sige daw. Ug tanaw na to. Kung how this person, okay, will create the algorithm for signing on to the website ctu.edu.ph if he or she, he, di, was not able to remember his password. Codino, where are you?
Ah, ayaw
Sige,
ng cancel, di. Ako
sige.
na lang.
So, mona siya kana. Ang ato ang steps
Kung
kung naka-remember.
forgot, sir, go to portal.ctu.edu.ph,
Okay?
then forgot password. I click forgot password, then enter mong email ID,
Okay?
then send mo send ang CTU sa kuan sa para change sa imong password, sir, sa imong email, then change password, then sign in sa portal CTU.
Okay, so mona ang answer ni Mr. Codino. Okay, so let's try someone else also. Okay, if he or she is to create an algorithm for accessing his or her account when they forgot about it. Okay, let's call on Ligis. Is that properly, or did I read it correctly? Ligis?
Sir, it's linguist, sir.
Ah, Ligues there. Okay, Ligues. Could you comment on Mr. Colina's answer? Is that clear enough for us to follow?
Um,
Or
I think so,
nakainak
sir.
expert
Yes,
or
sir.
monitor? Okay? So, nakoy nakit ang plot hole. Okay? On the answer of Mr. Codino. And this is when the computer sends email to you. Okay? Now, take note, kung ikaw may computer, you are the one to perform the operation. O kanang mingon og the computer or the system or the website sends an email to you, it is not something that you will be doing, but rather an effect of you sending your email to the system. Okay? So after sending email to the system, okay, so that would tell the system to send you your account. So dapat ang next step punta is you check your personal email. Okay? Nya, i-retrieve nimo ang imuhang new password. Then you go back to portalctu.edu, enter the email and the password, then sign in. Okay? Kay kung tanaw na to, ang website wa man kay control over that. Okay? So just like with a computer, kung wa siya control over that, how can he or she perform that operation? Okay? So ingana guys, when you try to create an algorithm, imuhang hunahunaon, okay? This instruction nga imuhang ihatag is for those that will perform the operation. Okay? So, mag-send ta og email for password retrieval but wala na to gi-check ang ato ang email. Okay? to see to it if naabajoy password ihatag. Okay, so again, don't worry, we'll have more example of this, more practice to come. Okay, now let's look at this example again. Okay, mark sheets of 50 students are available. Okay, so just think of it as a paper. Okay, calculate and produce the total number of students who pass in the first division. So in that mark sheet, na ay nakalabel nga first division, second division, third division. How are we supposed to create an algorithm for this one? Okay, unsay first step na to? Okay, so let me just show you first. So first and foremost, we initialize, okay, ang kaning so-called variable. Okay, are you familiar with variable, guys? Unsa kaninang variable sa nakatunan nato sa una? What are these so-called variables? Anyone? Okay. When you were doing your math, calculus, algebra, unsa man ang variable can be according to Canonigo, a variable you can store values in the variable. And essentially in programming, that is exactly what a variable is. It can store information. So we have an information that is, or we have a variable that is used to store the total number of first division and the total number of mark sheets being checked. Okay, so Kabauta, there are 50 students with a mark sheet that we need to check. Okay, and identify from those 50 sheets kung pila ka buok ang gikan sa first division. So, mo ni atong first step, nag-create ng variable to monitor the total number of first divisions and the total number of mark sheets being checked na. Okay? So, on the next step, okay, we take the mark sheet, okay, of the next student and check the division kung asa sila nagikan. After checking the division, as you can see guys, step by step to dato gipakita. If it is not the first division, go to step 5. Kung unsa may nasa step 5. Step 5 indicates you to add 1 to the total mark sheets. And that is how we are able to identify kung maabot na ba tag 50 ka papers ang check. Okay? Now, if it indeed is coming from the first division, then you add 1 to the variable total first division. Okay? So, ang sunod, 6. Okay? Step 6, check if total mark sheet check is 50 na ba. Kung dili pa 50, then you go back to step 2 again. You get another sheet and check the division again. And check again if it comes from the first division or not. Okay? So, if it's not from the first division, again, add 1 to the total mark sheet, or if it is coming from the first division, then you add 1 to the total first division. Until such time nga kung abot na gani si total mark sheets check to 50, as you can see, you now proceed to the next step, which is to print the total first division. Okay? And that, guys, is your algorithm for creating or solving the problem that states that you are to count the total number of students who pass the first division from the mark sheets of 50 students. Okay? So, in ana ang algorithm, guys. Okay? So, it will tell the computer step by step as to how we are to solve the problem. Okay, so again, the computer is not really that smart na muhatag lang kag problem, muhatag na sa answer. Mura magparehag Google that when you provide an equation, it will produce to you an answer na. Di ba? So, unsa na siya? May website dira sa Google that makita ninyo sa Google, okay, that performs such operations. Okay? But for programming, dapat ikaw may mo guide sa computer on what to do next. Okay? So, mo ni ato ang katunon. Usbo na to ang ato ang paradigm, okay, of how computers really work. Okay? So when you want to present an algorithm, okay, there are three ways of presenting an algorithm. It's either using a pseudocode, which is again a kind of structured English that is used to describe your algorithms. Basically, a pseudocode, guys, in a way, is mura ra gyapon na siya algorithm, but naa siya certain syntax nga gi-follow. Okay? Which is, of course, medyo duol-duol na siya sa implementation sa programming. Okay? And this so-called syntax are practically available in most programming language when implemented. Okay? So, na corresponding implementation sa abang programming language. And you also have here your flowchart. Okay? So, kinsa may wala ka ila diri flowchart or kinsa may wala ka suwag himo og flowchart diri. I do believe murag sa high school na siguro mo flowchart na. Okay? Nakaagi na ba mo flowchart? Okay, so nakakita mo atong meme sa una. Paghimuan nilag flowchart. Katong kang kinsa ganito, katong artista. Okay, so one example of a flowchart, guys, is kani. Okay, flowchart for fixing PC. Okay, so this flowchart essentially tells you the steps that are needed to be followed when you are trying to fix a PC. Pinaon ta lang. Okay, so in this example, okay, is your PC working fine? If yes, well, that's cool. It's okay. If your PC is not working fine, then what do you do next? So have you tried turning it off and on again? If yes, then good job. If no, then do it now. Okay? So as you can see, they all arrived to the same point gihapon. Then you check if the problem is solved after turning it off and on again. So if it didn't solve the problem, then you proceed to the next one. Or kung okay na gani, then it's cool. You fix your computer. Congratulations. If you haven't solved the problem yet, then go to Google. Search for a solution. Ask for help. Okay? So what to do next? Is the problem solved after asking Google and help? If wala, proceed to the next one. Can you still play without fixing the problem? Okay, so if no, then again, search for Google and help. Okay, and ask for help. If you can play it without fixing the problem, then good, you're good to go. Okay, so that is the flowchart for solving problems. Okay, the PC Gamer Edition. And hopefully you don't follow this. Okay, so that is just an example, guys, of a flowchart that you will be learning how to create. Okay, so daghan kay kabuang no sa internet. Okay, so another way of representing an algorithm is via the actual program. Okay, so we will be implementing this algorithm using a specific programming language, which is again C. Okay, so let's start first with pseudocodes. Okay, so what is a pseudocode? So as stated, pseudocode is a programming logic that is written in an ordinary natural language. Okay, so it helps allow the designer to focus on the logic of the algorithm without being distracted by the details of the language syntax. So without the language syntax, that means this solution is generic and you can implement it with any programming language. Okay, so we also refer to pseudocode as PDL or Program Design Language. So as what you can see there, the pseudocode is a narrative for someone who knows the requirement and is trying to learn how the solution will be organized. Now, in our example, extract the next word from the line. So that's one good example. okay, of writing your pseudocode. Okay, so the next one, as you can see there, set word to get next token. It's poorly written. Okay, kay nga naman, too technical. Okay, and it's hard to understand for non-technical people. Okay, so another example, append the file extension to the name. And when you say append, unsa man pasabot sa append, guys? Sumpayan. Okay? So unlike kaning sa Opus, name is equal to name plus extension. Okay? Now usually people, when you see the plus sign, you associate it with numbers. Okay? However, there are programming languages that makes use of the plus sign to perform concatenation or kaning pag-append. Okay? So, with pseudocode, okay, as what have we discussed earlier, there will be some so-called structures that you need to follow. Okay? Para dali ra pod masabtan when converted into its equivalent um, program. Okay? So let's look onto them. Okay? So when creating pseudocodes, there are three different control structure that you will be following. Okay? So natay pseudocode which are purely sequential. Okay? So when you say sequential by nature, ang steps niya is linear. So when you say linear, nagsunod-sunod lang na siya guys ang iyang gi-perform ng operation. Okay? So the tasks are performed sequentially. So natin gitawag na first step, second step, third step, fourth step, so on and so forth. Okay? So mo na siya nga ato ang gitawag na sequence. Okay? Napun tay gitawag nga selection. Okay? O anong appeal man si selection direct wala ma-enter. Okay? And dapat tayo gitawag na selection, decision, or kaning gitawag nato nga branching. Wherein, just like in our first example ganina, okay, with this flowchart, this is an example of night decision making na perform. Okay? So, na kay option as to whether your problem is answered via true or false. Okay, so which is basically how the computer works. Okay, true or false. Okay, so makakita niya tani later kaning if then else na statement. Okay, then naputi gitawag nga iteration or loop structure wherein it allows you to perform repetition. Okay, and those structures that we commonly use together with that is kanina while, for, repeat, and till. So if we look again at the flowchart as stated here, okay, diba, kabantay mo aning part sa flowchart nga murag nay nagbalik-balik. Okay, mao na example guys sa kanang gitawag nato nga loops. Okay, so similar po diri guys, okay, in our algorithm. In our algorithm, sige daw, ako na to kung maka-identify ba mo. Okay, so this algorithm is actually a combination of sequential, selection, and iteration. Okay, so which of this is ang selection na part? Let's try to get the answer of Miss or Mr. Okay, Mr. Somalino, turn on your cam. Okay, so asa dira dapita ang naay application sa katong selection. Mr. Somalino, are you here? Mr. Somalino. Asa man si Mr. Somalino? Uy, nasa si Mr. Somalino? Wala guys. Ah, tura di ay. Sige. Turn on your camera, Mr. Sumalinog, while answering. So, asa kita dira sa tuang algorithm kung asa ang selection nga part. Nice selection.
Add one to total cost division.
Okay. So, are you selecting? Do you have an option here to select? Selection.
Number 3, sir, it is not
Okay.
per division.
So, nadira guys, ang tanang selection. So, you are able to select what to do given this condition. Okay? Thank you for that, Mr. Sumalinog. Again, when I call your name, please turn on your camera as you answer. Okay. So, Alessandre Swan. Asa man diri dapit ang iteration sa ato ang oops, asa man to? Asa man ang iteration diri sa ato ang algorithm, Mr. Swan. Oh, Miss Swan there. Nakamute ka, Miss Swan. Unmute your mic.
Sorry, sir.
Number?
Six.
Ha?
Step 6, sir.
Step 6. Okay. So, mo ni ato ang iteration part, guys. Step 6. Kaya nga nung gitawag man ato ang iteration part, this is the part that allows us to repeat this part of your algorithm. Okay? So, again, very self-explanatory ang selection o ang iteration. So, ang sequence, basically, are these steps nga itong i-follow, starting from top to bottom. Okay? So, mana siya guys, ang ato ang critical structures when creating your pseudocode. Now, when creating your pseudocode, as stated, there is not a rigorous notation. Okay? So, wala dyan tayo i-follow ani nga standards when creating pseudocode. Okay? However, for our class purposes, okay, please do make use of the following keywords nga to ang i-provide para mas dali na to masabtan ang buot ninyong ipaibot. So, let's say, if you're talking about like, let's say, input side, okay, anything that would require the computer, okay, to read an information from the user, we start it with a read. Okay? Now, if it's all about generating an output, a result, let's call it as print. Okay? So, ako lang i-highlight diradaan ang mga words nga itong gamitan. Now, if there will be some computations done, which by the way, is the nature of our nature of the problem that we will be doing, since you are engineering, so ato na itong mga programs are basically one that would involve computations. Okay? So, butang ilang nag-compute na keyword. Okay? Then, initialize. So, mag-initialize. Just like the steps that we did kanina with algorithm. Okay? Total first division and total mark sheets check. Okay? So, ang initialize, medyo taas-taas man, let's just make use of set. Okay? Kaya pwede man mo ma-initialize not just to 0, but it could be any number. Okay? So, we use that value. Okay? So, when you add 1, okay, so imbis magbutang pa ka dira og add 1, okay, just make use of the word increment to specify nga you are to increase the value of that variable by 1. Okay? So, kana lang guys. Again, there is no standard when creating pseudocode. But again, for our class, let's be reminded, okay, to make use of that following format when creating the input, the output part, okay, the computational part, initialization part, and the adding of one. Okay, so let's look at these examples. Okay, so what do we have here? Okay, so nakita na to guys. What does this remind you of? So set total first division is equal to 0 and total mark sheets check is equal to 0. So while counter is less than 50, you read the mark sheet. If mark sheet is not equal to the first division, okay, then you increment the total mark sheet check. Okay. Otherwise, or else if, increment the first total division. And that will be the end of the selection statement part. Okay. So if the counter still is, let's say, less than or equal to 50, okay, then you still proceed with that statement within the while structure. Okay, so kaning while. So as you can see guys, we have implemented so-called tabbing, okay, para makita nato kung kinsay gibuhat ni structure na while or kinsay gibuhat ni structure na if. Okay? Hello, are you still with me guys? Okay.
Yes, sir.
So again, after that statement sa imong selection of while, you then proceed with printing of the output that is being required, which is the total first division na value. Okay? So, yan. I think let's modify that word counter di ay. Budget lang. Let me modify that para consistent ang ako ang igamit nga variable with the condition. Okay? So ako lang gi-modify diri guys. Kay mo man ato ang gi-monitor si total mark sheet check. Okay? If less than 50 pa ba. So if less than 50 pa siya, then magsigig balik-balik diri sa while nga statement. Okay? So again, one way to know more about creating pseudocode is again answer more problems. Okay? So we'll just do it together with flowchart lang po. Okay? So we have a problem, we create the appropriate pseudocode, then we draw the equivalent flowchart. Now, for creating the flowchart, we need to be familiar with the different symbols utilized in creating flowchart. So, number one is tinatawag natin ang terminal block. Okay? So, ang terminal block, mo na ito ang gamiton to determine as to whether that is the start or the stop of our program. Okay? So later when we talk about the so-called subroutines, okay, we will use that block to indicate the start or stop of that function. Okay, so later we'll be discussing more about function. So mas specific na siya nga topic. So for now, di lang sa tamang ng function. Okay, so aside from there, you have there the rectangular shape which talks about the process. Okay, so when you talk about process, one good example ana is where your computations occur. Okay, unsa nga mga formula ang imong gipanggamit. And as you can see there, the parallelogram is the same symbol utilized for input and output. Now, how will we identify if it's gonna be an input nga diagram or output nga diagram ang gigamit for the parallelogram? So, you simply make use of the keywords katong read ug print, guys. Okay? Just like in the pseudocode. And then you have there the decision, okay, which is characterized by a diamond symbol. So sa decision, usually there are only two branches going out, which is basically representing true or false. Okay, based on the decision done. Ang decision nimo usually naa kay gitawag nga condition dira that is answerable by either yes or no or true or false. Okay. We also have here kaning function or subroutine. So again, as what I told you earlier, we'll be discussing more about functions in the later topic. Okay? So ang difference lang with what a function is and what this so-called process is that ang function actually is like um, a label to a more detailed process. Okay? So, usually, kaninga process man good taas-taas. So, what you do, you can simplify the main flowchart by utilizing this so-called function. So, probably, maingon lang ka dira, function, sa may, so, may example sa function. Let's say, um, buy milk. Okay? So, when you buy milk, what do you need to do? So, probably, ngayo kwarta ni mama. Okay? Then, sulog chinilas. Go out of the door. Go to the nearest sari-sari store. Okay? So, kanang nearest pa jud, how do you identify the nearest sari-sari store? So, nasa kay line function na. Find nearest sari-sari store. To find the nearest sari-sari store, go to Google Earth. Okay? So, ako nimo pangita ng pinakadool nga sari-sari store sa inyong barangay baro. Or you could actually just ask your neighbors. So anyway, murag ambot lang mo, ako ba'y naminaw, wa may ni-react, or corny na jud kayo akong joke. So anyway, padayon ta, another symbol that you might be using with your flowchart is kaning gitawag natong on-page connector. Okay? So when your flowchart involves a lot of decision making, okay, as much as possible manggod, those lines kay imong pangbuhaton dapat walay mag-cross. Okay? So you might be forced to make use of on-page connector. So butangan lang ninyo mo siya dire og label, guys, indicating that this connector here is connected to another part of the flowchart having that same a label. Okay? Now, if di masulod sa usa ka papel, natay gitawag pod nga off-page connector. So, ang purpose nga nung nay off-page connector is of course, magsige niya kag pinangitaan ng A nga label nimo on the same page niya, naara day siya sa lain pang page. So, there is a specific off-page connector symbol that you can use if ever ang continuation sa imong flowchart would expand to another page. Okay? And of course, ang ato ang gitawag na flow line. Okay? So how will you know if it's a flow line? So a flow line must have a direction as indicated by your arrow as to where it is supposed to be going. So very common siya sa sequential natong structure. Okay? So usually when creating flowchart, ang direction sa ato ang flow sa program would be from top to bottom, then left to right. Okay? So, mo na yung mga common direction sa pag-create ng flowchart. Okay? Now, so far, are we familiar na? Murag dagan mo nakakuha ni sa exam. So, familiar. Very simple ang mga shapes, guys. Oblong, rectangle, parallelogram, diamond, okay? And kanang circle o off-page connector are seldomly used. Okay? So, first part sa itong discussion, kanang function o subroutine nga symbol, di pa kayo na nato magamit for now. So, maybe later on our future topics. Okay? So, most operators na pwede ninyo magamit. Are you familiar with these operators? Relational operators. So, I do believe kinder pa lang, nakaagi na taan nino. Arithmetic o relational operators. So, kinsa may wakailain taon ani. So when you say relational operators, usually we make use of them as to indicate the size or equality between objects. Okay, so in a pseudocode or in a flowchart, we use them to compare numbers. Okay, so probably something new to you is kaning logical operator. Okay, so I will just change the font. Kaning logical operator is characterized by the so-called ampersand symbol. Okay, so lahi man ang renders ako ang text diri. Okay, so nga na ang ampersand. Okay, are you familiar with logical operators? Anyone here who can share their experience with logical operator? Labi na katong nakagi og programming na pag senior high. Would you share? Or ako na to, kung makashare ba si daghan lagi kay maawawon diri no, dili kayo hilig mo participate kung let's say na ay oral discussion. Ako na to, kung makashare ba si kinsa man yato ang ka-share ron. Okay, si Miss Negre. Okay, can you tell us something about kaning logical operations, Miss Negre? Tama? Miss Negre. Oh, Mr. Negre di ay. Negre, are you still here? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Something to share about logical operators? Okay, so asap ni nato nagian si logical operators. Okay,
Sir, B, sir. Return to true.
okay, so si logical operators would return to us a value of true or false, just like your relational operator. Okay, that's one. Thank you for that, Mr. Negre. Okay, so let's ask someone else also. Dali, nalang tag 8 minutes. Na to. Okay, what can you say about the and operator, Miss Manggubat? Okay, so Miss Manggubat, can you tell us something about the and operator and what does it do? Okay, so kani guys, ma-associate ninyo sa topic on Venn diagram. Okay, Miss Manggubat, are you here with us? Sasabi si Miss Manggubat, kindly turn on your camera please. There you go. Murag working pa si Miss Manggubat. And murag naka-mute ang imuhang mic. We cannot hear you. Pagdungog rin niya guys. Sige daw, Miss Manggubat again.
Hello.
Kana. Okay na. Sige, Miss Manggubat. What can you say about the and operator?
Both values are true.
Okay, true ra siya if both values are true. Okay, thank you for that, Miss Manggubat. Okay, sige. So let's select another one. Okay. Miss Mahinay, okay, what can you tell us about the OR operator?
Sir, ang logical operators kay gamiton
Or
para mo connect o para i-connect ang kuan kanang two or more expressions.
okay, what about the OR in specific? Kanang OR operator, what does it do?
Sir, marag kanang ang expression ba kay and or not.
Again, Miss Mahinay, I'm asking about the OR operator in particular. Okay, so ganina when talking about the and, dapat both conditions are true para ang output is true. How about the or?
Kuan sir kanang both condition kay kanang pwede siya kanang or
Nagalibog na si Miss Mahinay. Okay? So, ani na lang guys. Okay? Let me show you, okay, an easier way for you to understand the and the or logical operator. Okay? So, are you familiar with so-called switches? Okay? Are you familiar with switches, guys? Okay. So, when talking about the machine, diba, they work on the principle of operations like one or zeros or false, okay, on and off. So, if we are trying to understand how the computer think, okay, let's also understand how they work. So, if you have a switch here, this is a symbol for a switch. So, that means kung nakay positive dire, kung nakay negative, kung both is naka-off, that is synonymous with zero. Okay? And when one of this switch is turned on, the output is still is zero. However, if both switch A and B are turned on, the bulb lights up. And that is the logical operator AND. That means two conditions must be true for the output to be true. Okay? So the output will be true if ang ato ang bulb musika. And that is the AND logic operation. And this is the OR logic, guys. Okay? Are you familiar with this one sa physics ninyo? Mga connection? Everyone? Does the drawing make sense? Okay. So given that naa kay switch A ug B, para musiga si suga unsa may dapat conditions natong ihatag?
If usa ka switch sir on.
Okay. Essentially, that is also true with logical operator. As long as one of your expression is true, the entire expression is deemed as true. Okay? And this is how OR operation work. Okay? So, pariha ra jud na siya unsa ni siya nga connection kung sa electrical notation pa ang AND. Okay? And this is the OR. Okay, sa physics, what have you learned in physics about this connection nga naging ani ang switches? What's this? It is?
Series, sir.
Okay, very good. Series. And therefore, ang OR is, unsa man?
Parallel.
Parallel.
Parang sir.
Okay? So again guys, if you go back into the olden times, this is how they created the computers. Okay, so the computers are able to distinguish logical operators using series and parallel connection. Okay, now how about the NOT? Unsa man ang NOT? So ang NOT is represented by something like this. Okay, so it's like a different kind of switch. If this switch, kung wala nimo gi-activate, is open, kani nga switch, kung wala nimo gi-activate, the switch is closed. Okay? So kung wala nimo gi-activate ang switch, the output is on. If you press the switch down, then the output is off. And that is what is meant by NOT. It simply inverts the command that you gave your system. So kung wala ko gi-turn on by not pushing the button, naka-on ra ang suga. But the moment I press the switch on, ma-off na hinuon ang suga. So palihon na niya guys. Okay? So same ra pud na siya sa program. Okay? So mo na siya if we are trying to compare it in electrical notation. Okay? So Again, here is an example of a control sequence. Okay, so kasunod-sunod lang. So essentially, mas masanan to gamay, 1 minute. This is the start, and this is your stop. So probably you have something here that needs input. Okay, let's say input for A and input for B, and this one for your process. So let's say sa process, we do some computation. Compute A plus B, and ang output, let's say S pareho. So what do you generate here? So we print. Okay, so kung sa may print na to, we print the sum. So this is a simple flowchart for computing the sum of two numbers. Okay? So again, in your notes na ako niyang i-upload, there are examples there showing the pseudocode and of course ang iyahapong flowchart. Okay? So let's discuss more about this in the upcoming meeting. Okay? So i-upload din ako guys and try to answer some of these exercises. Okay? So answer it by yourself na lang. Yeah, let's try to check it again next meeting. Okay? So try to check na lang sa examples dere. Okay? Using the selection, the sequential, and the iteration na structure or the repetition. Okay? So, may mga examples dere na pwede ninyong tanawon and try to answer some of these exercises. Okay? So, again, let's proceed with the discussion again next meeting. Okay, importante kay ni siya before we actually learn how to program because basically that pseudocode and flowchart will serve as our guide when we create our program. Okay? So even katong mga hanas na kaayo nga programmer, if things becomes a bit complicated, it is very important that they also know about how to perform this so-called flow charting. Okay? So before we go, can we turn on our camera please?